Greetings everyone, welcome to Music is a Journey. I'm Peter. This is part 3 in my 3-part series on Japanese shoegaze music. I planned this way back at the beginning or middle of May. I thought I'd be wrapped up by the middle of June. It's taken a little bit longer than I expected. And of course, when I planned these videos back in the middle of May, I already had my experience up until that point. And of course, since then, my experience has continued. So there have been some last minute changes and then some more last minute changes. And now here we are at last, the 3rd episode. By the way, it is really hot here these last couple of weeks in Saitama, Japan, actually in most of the country. It is 30 degrees in this room here. There is no air conditioning in this room. However, I have an electric fan going, so if you hear some kind of fan sound in the background, that's just me trying to keep from melting in front of the camera. So in the very first video, I talked about the Japanese shoegaze scene, the history going back from the early 90s, what happened, how it came and went and came back, and where we reached in the present day, the scene. Then in the second video, I talked about 14 albums and EPs that I had picked up that I thought were worth mentioning, giving some description, because a lot of the albums that are frequently talked about are not so easy to get a hold of, but then I was able to get a hold of other ones, and I thought maybe I would share my thoughts on those. So now here we are in the 3rd one, and I want to talk about some of the difficulties, some of the challenges of getting into Japanese shoegaze music as well. At the end, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite songs. So let's get started with some of the questions. How did I discover Japanese shoegaze bands? It was back around the summer of 2024. I think some people, some YouTube channels I follow in the vinyl community, a couple of people were talking about shoegaze, and I guess it so happened that YouTube, the algorithm, guessed that maybe I might be interested in shoegaze, and since I live in Japan, maybe I'd be interested in Japanese shoegaze. So one day when I opened YouTube, one of the recommended videos was on a channel called Stained Glass Stories, and it was about the Japanese shoegaze scene. That channel is pretty much devoted to shoegaze, dream pop, and that type of thing. So yeah, that was my first experience. I watched that video, and the host of the video introduced 10 albums and explained why they were important or what they were like, and that was a really good introduction for me. At that time, I still wasn't sure that I really wanted to jump into it, but it was a good introduction, and as a result, I ended up checking out some of those albums on YouTube and found that nearly all of them were almost impossible to get a hold of. They had been already out of print for some 15 or 20 years, and just simply were not available unless I might be lucky enough to track down a used copy for an exorbitant amount of money. There was one band, though, I managed to pick up on the list. I got a used copy of a couple of albums, actually by Luminous Orange, whom I mentioned in the first video. As well as the Stained Glass Stories video, I later on checked out lists on Write Your Music, and as I mentioned in previous videos, there was one list that listed 171 albums. I don't think there were any repeats of bands, so that would have been 171 artists and bands as well. There were other lists that were a little bit more modest, maybe introducing 15 or 30 bands. There were also some blogs where people were talking about Japanese shoegaze albums you should get into. And there was another YouTube channel called Almy, A-L-M-Y. He also introduced 5 Japanese shoegaze bands you should get into. And I've seen him talk about a couple of other bands on his channel as well. And finally, there were just some Japanese blogs that I checked out to see what, non-Japanese people had been saying up until now. So I wanted to know what were Japanese people saying about their own shoegaze scene. And one of them was interesting. On his blog, he actually listed a bunch of bands to get into. And just to name them here, his list included Luby Sparks, whom I'll talk about later on, for Tracy Hyde, whom I'll talk about later on, Hitsuji Bungaku, whom I've already talked about, Plant Cell, who I talked about in a special, not part of this 3-part series, an extra video where I mentioned 3 albums I'd recently picked up, Wallflower, and based on that blog, I decided to give them a listen. This is very much a dream pop type album, but he mentioned Wallflower. I liked the song that I heard. I was able to get the album, and it actually came with a bonus disc. It is just a blank white like CD with no label or anything tucked into a little CD sleeve with this little print here on there. So there were two bonus tracks that came along on a separate CD with this album. And yeah, it's a very pleasant, beautiful dream pop type album. So Wallflower, and finally Spool, whom I talked about in the last video, and of course it's their debut album that is recommended. I talked about their third album, which has moved largely away from shoegaze and has become more of a women's rock band, but still has some shoegaze elements in a couple of the songs. What exactly is shoegaze? My experience with shoegaze was quite limited, although I did have an impression based on the My Bloody Valentine Loveless album, as well as a few other things I had heard here and there. A couple of albums I picked up last year had shoegaze elements. I did make a video earlier this year about my journey into shoegaze, how I finally reached the point where I wanted specifically to buy a shoegaze album. But one thing I found was that my impression of what shoegaze is and what I was hearing on albums that were on these shoegaze album lists wasn't always exactly the same thing. So it made me wonder, either I don't understand what shoegaze is exactly, or there are just many possibilities that allow you to still be a shoegaze band. And I can relate to this coming from a heavy metal perspective, because you can take a look at something like, Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Metallica, Celtic Frost, Bathory, and then a lot of these extreme metal bands like Archspire and so on. It's a wide variety of musical styles, and they all fall in under the heavy metal umbrella or metal umbrella. With shoegaze, I was getting the impression that there was a core set of elements, most notably the layers and layers of guitar effects, connecting several different effects pedals together. There was actually a short video on Reddit I saw where the title of the video clip was "I stopped playing 10 minutes ago," and the video just showed a series of pedals connected with effects continuing to just be generated automatically, even though the musician was no longer playing the guitar. So anyway, that is one of the core elements, this wall of sound guitar effects, and as well, it is often stated that the vocals are usually very soft and in the background. So I want to read out just a couple of things I got from Anthony Fontano, the music nerd, the needle drop. He did a video about shoegaze maybe a year or so ago, and also talked with Kelsey, a young lady from a channel called The Yellow Button. So they picked some of their recommended shoegaze albums. Kelsey said it's a wall of sound, very fuzzy and distorted guitars. With shoegaze specifically, it sounds a little more dark compared to dream pop, which is very ethereal and light and atmospheric. Shoegaze is very gritty, dark, with lots of distortion hitting you in the face. And Anthony Fontano, he mentioned the guitar noise with very clear stylistic connections to psychedelic. It very much is a psychedelic genre of music, and I'm going to interject here with someone writing in the comment section of my first video in this series that shoegaze is actually, he said, part of the third wave of psychedelic music. And that makes sense to me, because in my video of how I got into shoegaze, I mentioned my interest in a lot of the psychedelic bands of the late 60s, specifically those that made a lot of noise with guitar, even if it was just meant as an effect in one part of the song, specifically citing Iron Butterfly and also some of the stuff Jeff Beck did with the Yardbirds. So, going with that psychedelic flow here, those layers of guitar sounds, those checkboxes are there. They are also very malleable, he says. Anthony Fontano says, those basics of guitar fuzz and noise can be applied to a ton of different contexts. There are bands incorporating shoegaze elements, but some are more pop-centric or rock-centric, or even in the metal camp. You could apply it in a wide variety of different ways across different genres. It's in a way like an aesthetic creative style that you can apply to different styles of music. That was not an exactly like word for word verbatim type of quote. I did make a couple of shortcuts here, but that is the basic idea. And I was really glad to hear him say that, because my own impression was that you have that core sound that is undeniably shoegaze. But if you make some adjustments here and there, you can move it into other rock types. For example, remove some of the distortion, but keep the dreaminess, you get more into dream pop. Add more distortion and get a little bit more noisy, you get into noise rock. You can darken it and make gruffer vocals, add the required lyrics, and you can actually get into black gaze, for example. You can remove the distortion and extend the tracks a little bit more. You can put it into post rock, for example. You can move into jangle rock or jangle pop or whatever. Just by making little adjustments here and there, you can move into different types of different subgenres of alternative rock. So maybe Anthony Fontano just put a different spin on it from my impression. So I'm always glad when I draw my own conclusions and later on find someone with more knowledge and more experience has similar things to say. Still, though, I had my impression of what it should sound like, and for example, Tokyo Shoegazer. That's what I'm looking for. Well, yeah, that's the sweet spot. How about Cattle? Right on. That's the shoegaze style I'm looking for. That guitar sound exactly sounds like it's music being played through a jet turbine in a wind tunnel, as I like to describe it sometimes. But then there were other bands I checked out that were listed as Japanese shoegaze, like for example Uchu Nekoko. Is that really shoegaze? And for Tracy Hyde, certainly they have some shoegaze type songs, but they have other songs too, like this. So they're not exclusively a shoegaze band. Coal Tar of the Deepers, yeah, they can get shoegazy, but they can also do this. So again, not exclusively a shoegaze band. And then there's Hitsuji Bungaku. Are they actually really shoegaze? I feel like they're not. Just sometimes when they crank up the distortion a bit more, it could kind of bring them closer to shoegaze, but I don't specifically think of them as a shoegaze band. Most of their songs do not have the checkboxes. So I don't know why, but anyway, they are categorized as such. So that made me think also perhaps the modern day Japanese shoegaze scene, which I guess would be a kind of third wave in Japan. If we consider the original sounds coming in the early 90s, there was never really a full-fledged shoegaze band that I'm aware of, but there were bands that certainly used a lot of the elements in their music and could be considered the baby steps into shoegaze. Then later on in the late 1990s, early 2000s, we find bands adding that to their style and to a lot of their songs. Maybe Luminous Orange being close. Certainly there were some bands like Crife in the Bedroom. They really took that sound on. Heartfield going between shoegaze and dream pop maybe. But it wasn't until I think around 2005, 6, 7 we start hearing bands that really embrace that full-on wall of sound, noisy guitar approach with the soft, almost incomprehensible vocals at times. There were a lot of bands at that time, which I think would probably be the second wave. And then we get through the 2010s as a bit of a fluctuation, and the modern sound of a lot of bands actually does not include so much of that wall of sound distortion, but they still have layers and layers of sounds, of vocals and clean guitar and even synthesizers or even piano in some cases. So you're getting layers and layers of sound coming at you, but in a more softer, gentle context. And maybe, again, somebody commented in one of my videos that maybe we have to consider that this is the present day Japanese approach to shoegaze, and that it still has its roots in the traditional shoegaze approach, but also includes maybe a lot more of the dream pop effect than the shoegaze effect, but it is nevertheless considered shoegaze in the present date in Japan. Which brings to mind something that I saw on a channel called Pedal Partners. It is a guy who really devotes his whole channel to shoegaze. He not only has been into it since the beginnings back in the 1980s, but he also plays it and shows you how to achieve the different sounds that some of the bands achieve. And he said that one thing to take away from the video that I watched, he said that most shoegaze bands are dream pop bands, but dream pop bands are not shoegaze bands. So there is definitely some close crossover between the two genres. Availability. This was the most frustrating aspect of getting into this scene. I saw a lot of lists that were created by non-Japanese people recommending Japanese shoegaze albums to get into, and so many of them were already out of print. Most of these albums were released either in the late 1990s or mostly in the 2000s, some in the early 2010s, and many of them are simply out of print. If you want to track them down, you've got to hunt around quite a bit on the internet. And for example, Coal Tar of the Deepers, No Thank You, their most commonly mentioned album, and probably the one out of what I've heard that most closely stays around the shoegaze genre. I can buy a used copy for about 6,000 yen. And I think here I should point out, new CDs in Japan typically cost about 2,500 yen if you're getting a digipack, and about 3,000 yen if you're getting a jewel case. Often they come with a good stack of material in. It's not just a card that opens up. It's usually a booklet. There's a lot of effort going into the packaging, so that's why it can easily be 3,000 yen, or even more if you get one with the limited edition first edition. Limited edition first edition sometimes comes with a DVD or other things. So yeah, we're looking at about 2,500 to 3,000 yen for a brand new CD in Japan. And we're looking here for some of these out of print ones, 5,000, 6,000 yen for a used copy. Granted, they're often in very good condition. But then there are other ones such as these ones here. These are the prices I'm finding on the internet, just checking the Mercari flea market or Yahoo flea market or Yahoo auction, even Amazon marketplace. We're seeing some really exorbitant prices, and you gotta understand that some of these are even just EPs. Take for example the EP, the first EP release on of the present day lineup of Hitsuji Bungaku. A lot of people are selling it for, this kind of price here. Thankfully, I actually have found some where it's a bit cheaper, but it is still, a few thousand yen. So we're looking at crazy prices to get a hold of some of these top recommended Japanese shoegaze albums. And I found after a while that once I started looking, there were just so many more bands. In fact, when I first wasn't even looking for Japanese shoegaze, I was just looking for bands that featured female members for a video I wanted to do earlier this year. YouTube started recommending things like 17 Years Old and Berlin Wall, CLW, Cephalo, and some other ones. And that's really how I started to find out that there were a lot of Japanese shoegaze bands that are not commonly mentioned on these lists created by non-Japanese people. And there is a whole vibrant scene going on in Japan now with just so many bands out there. There was one record label, I found a Spotify playlist of theirs, which included, I think it was over 70 bands and 70 songs, and no band was repeated. Easily we can say there are probably hundreds and hundreds of bands out there, and many of them don't even have a physical release yet. They just have something they've put out on Spotify or Amazon Music or even just YouTube, whatever. Nevertheless, it can be pretty difficult to find some of these. A lot of them are short time runs, like they print only so many, they're sold out and they're gone. Thankfully, there have been some reissues recently. Actually, I want to mention, so previously I wanted to get a hold of Hotel Insomnia. This was the last album to be released for Tracy Hyde before they broke up in March of 2023. It was not available anywhere except one copy I found available from a seller in Indonesia. But by chance last month, I was just scooting around on Amazon to see if there was anything, and by a whim, I guess, I decided to just take a look for Tracy Hyde to see if I might be interested in getting their earlier albums. And then Hotel Insomnia was available. There are 2 copies left, so I managed to snag one. As an example of availability, though, even though Tracy Hyde's 5 albums are available to some degree or another, their first 5 EPs, I've only ever seen one listed. It was for 7,000 yen. It was on Yahoo Auction, and it sold within a week or two anyway. And I've never seen any of their other EPs listed. So availability is an issue unless you want to just try to look around to see what is available and check that out and decide if you want to get it or not. And as I mentioned previously, this Holiday Records here, they have a lot of Japanese shoegaze bands, modern bands on their website. I think it was actually holidayrecords.base. There's a lot of material available there. Check out Holiday Records. Check out the albums that they have in their shoegaze department. And if you like them, a lot of them are still available, even though there are many that are sold out. 5 albums I would really like to be able to get. So the availability issue is a frustration, and there are 5 albums I would really like to be able to get if I could ever even find a copy. In some cases, there is a copy available, but again, we're talking about really high price. In other cases, I haven't even been able to find a copy available. So one of them is the album I Hate, I Hope by a group called Lemon's Chair. Now, Lemon's Chair were one of those early 2010 bands that really took to the shoegaze scene, exactly naming, I think, one of their albums using the word shoegaze in the title. So they really embraced it and had that shoegaze sound. And that album in particular shows up on lists as recommended albums. I've given it a bit of a listen to on YouTube, and it sounds great. It sounds exactly like what I would expect from a Japanese shoegaze band. So if I can find it, that would be awesome. I have only ever seen one Lemon's Chair album available anywhere, and once again, it was very high priced. Another one is a group called Broken Little Sister and an album called Memories, Violet, and Demons. This also sounds just like I would expect from a Japanese shoegaze band. Soft female vocals, very noisy guitars, sounds great. The only thing I can actually find available by Broken Little Sister is a song included on a compilation. So I might have to get that compilation just to at least get one song by that band. It would really be great if they reissued that album as well as the Lemon's Chair album. Coal Tar of the Deepers, no thank you. Yeah, I would like to get that one. I've only got one Coal Tar of the Deepers album so far. I rather like it. I don't think I'm going to be like a, maniac fan or anything. And there are some albums available out there, not too crazily priced. Some of their less popular ones, but no thank you. I've only ever seen 1 or 2 copies available and over 6,000 yen for a used one. It would be nice to see that one reissued. Could it happen? Maybe. Mass of the Fermenting Dregs, only their most recent album was available on Tower Records. Everybody else I saw listing it said it has to be ordered in from the maker, which usually means that it's not available. And any of their other older albums, again, you can find them used here and there, very high priced. I just would really like to get a hold of one of their early releases anyway. There are only 6 tracks on their first 2 albums, so it's not like there's a ton of music or whatever, but they are, even though I don't consider them a shoegaze band by the standards I'm going by, they still are kind of one of those legendary underground bands in Japan. And there was recently, I think, a documentary made, maybe unprofessionally, I don't know, about them, and the singer, now I've forgotten her name, but anyway, she said that it seems that there is an appreciation for Mass of the Fermenting Dregs overseas, and that's really cool. So it would be nice to see some of their older albums reissued so that they could be acquired for a reasonable price. So one album I really wanted to get a hold of back in May, I actually was recently able to get a hold of. This is Nanocycle and Something Burning. This was used but like new on Amazon for just under 3,000 yen. So that was really nice. That was quite reasonable. And this album is rather good. It's mostly instrumental. The tracks that actually have lyrics, the lyrics don't make up a large part of the songs. And there is one track on here called Folksonomy. I am so hooked on that one. I heard it the other day and I played it again and I played it again. And then after work, I played it 2 more times. It is a very simple, quick-paced charging track based around two chords basically, but with this like 70s, late 60s, 70s kind of high keyboard sound, like a whistle almost. And I just really love the feel of the music and the overall, yeah, the track. I'm just hooked on it totally. The rest of the album is also rather good though, so I'm glad to be able to check that one off the list of albums that I would really like to be able to get if I could find them. But still, we also have Heartfield, one of the original four. I guess they're saying what? Coulter of the Deepers, Heartfield, Crife in the Bedroom, and was it Mass of the Fermenting Dregs, who are considered like four of the big Japanese shoegaze bands of the early 2000s. Although Mass of the Fermenting Dregs didn't actually start releasing stuff until 2007, 2008. But anyway, like I said, I don't consider some of those bands to be true blue shoegaze bands, but nevertheless, Heartfield, they released one album and an EP. There was actually a compilation of those two released on a label in South Korea, but you know, good luck in finding it. If you can find it, I think I found one copy that is in good condition. Not very good, not excellent, just good condition. And again, it was thousands of yen, so too much to pay for that. So Heartfield, it would be really nice to see a reissue of their album because, you know, a lot of people are saying that that is a great album to get into. And finally, 17 Years Old and Berlin Wall, their second album, Reflect, is the only one I can't get a hold of, and it should be their best, or at least one of their two best. I mentioned in a video a little bit earlier this year how I actually found a copy available with their first and third album, the three together, as a very reasonably priced set, about just over 3,000 yen. And what a disaster in trying to order it. In the end, I was scammed out of 3,000 yen. So there's a video about that back in my channel. Anyway, so that one actually hurt trying to get a hold of that one, and it didn't work out. So 17 Years Old and Berlin Wall, their second album, second EP actually, Reflect. Okay, now let's get on to, specifically I want to talk about 5 songs that I picked back around the middle or end of May as 5 favorite songs. There have since been new ones. As I mentioned, this Folksonomy from Nanocycle has recently really grabbed me. In the previous video where I talked about 3 albums, I said that Kinoko Teikoku's album, Eureka, there are a couple of tracks on there that I really, really love. And in fact, I have more or less got hooked on Kinoko Teikoku. I recently picked up their second full-length album, Fake World Wonderland. It's not as good as Eureka, but it still has some great tracks, and I have tracked down the remainder of their catalog that I didn't have, and I've picked up some used in very nice condition off the auctions just last night for half the price of a new CD. So I'm looking forward to getting those, and once those come in, I will have only one more album to get to complete their catalog. So expect me to do a video in the future specifically on the albums of Kinoko Teikoku. So let's take a look at those 5 songs. First of all, 17 Years Old and Berlin Wall, from their debut EP, Aspect. This goes back to around 2017, I think it was. It's track number 5, Rokugatsu, which means June. That one just has what you would expect from a shoegaze song. Very loud distorted guitars, the glide guitar effect, the male vocals, which are sometimes not particularly strong, and 17 Years Old and Berlin Wall actually sound pretty decent here. Joined by the female vocalist, I think her name was Erika or Eriko. Wait a minute, I can almost see it here. Eriko? Yes. That's an interesting thing. Like a lot of the Japanese shoegaze bands, they only list one name in their credits. Like they will have a nickname or their first name or their last name. They rarely give first and last name. But anyway, Eriko. So that song, Rokugatsu, is really, really good. I would almost have gone with a song on here, Dareka ga ita umi, which is something like the sea where somebody was, or something like that as a rough translation. That is also a really great song, and this is from their 4th EP, Abstract. I want to give just a brief review. Their Aspect EP, this is a great shoegaze, Japanese shoegaze album, male-female vocals. Not all the tracks are full-on flooded distortion guitar. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but it is a very nice album. And their second album, Reflect, I've listened to the whole thing on YouTube once. I think it follows suit. There is a song on there called Prism, I think. There's a video on YouTube for that. There's also a song on here called, I don't know how to read it exactly. It could be Shujitsu or Shunichi. Anyway, it means the last day or end day, and I think it is the end of the day or something, and is an English title, a YouTube video for that. A cute video. So this is a great album, and the next one sounds like it should be. Their third album, Object, this one is not as good, still keeps a lot of the guitar distortion, but Eriko's vocals are here only as a supporting vocal in one song and as a backing vocal in one or two songs. Otherwise, the male vocalist, sorry, I can't see all that well, my eyes are getting old. He is not so strong on here. He's not particularly a strong singer usually, but he has his good moments. And by the way, some of you with a keen eye for Canadian geography might notice that the actual landscape photo in the background here is a view from Sulphur Mountain in Banff National Park, looking down to the Banff town site with Castle Mountain down here in the bottom left of the picture. Okay. Then their fourth album, Abstract. This one here, I really like it. I think I like three of the 6 songs on here are really great. 2 of them are also pretty good. This is less of a direct in-your-face shoegaze album, although it does feature a lot of guitar distortion. There are some keyboards on here. The male vocalist sounds his best on this album out of all the ones I've heard, and Eriko takes lead on a lot of the songs, which is really wonderful. I do like the sound of her vocals, so I think Abstract is the best one to get, just in my opinion. But again, Abstract and Reflect are also really strong ones if you can find them. And finally, their latest one, Distance. This one was disappointing. First of all, only 4 tracks. Eriko, I think she might sing backup in one song. No lead vocals by her, all lead done by the regular male singer as well as one other male singer, and it gives it more of a Japanese pop, almost hip-hop-ish vibe in a way, not quite, but like that kind of Japanese pop rock with a bit of a hip hop twinge to it. I don't know. It just doesn't sound as good to me as their other albums. I almost would say it was not worth getting, but because of the consistency in the formatting here of the albums, they alternate between black and white, like photo style. Reflect was black, this one is white, and I liked that, and it just because it was, you know, one of the first Japanese shoegaze bands I got into after Luminous Orange, I wanted to have the complete set. But Distance, the album cover, is the best part of that album. Anyway, my pick for that is Rokugatsu from Abstract, the track number 5. It means June. That's came out as my favorite out of 2 or 3 choices that were close to being my favorite picks. Okay, next up, number 4 on the list. For Tracy Hyde's third album, New Young City, it has to be Can Little Birds Remember. Once I heard that song, I immediately decided I had to get this album. And it is really a very decent album, alternating between like dream pop, jangle pop, shoegaze, and, you know, moving around in different territories there. But Can Little Birds Remember is just such a standout track. If I were to rate the songs out of stars, Can Little Birds Remember would just be a 6-star song, elevating above anything else on this album. So Can Little Birds Remember. I mentioned also I got their 4th album, Eternity. This one is also quite good, and again, there's at least one song on here. I think it is called Interdependence Day Part 1. That is a really great track. And what's it? Oh yeah, and then I mentioned I got the more recent one. I don't know if I really need to get the first 2 albums. I think I might have to listen to them first. But anyway, for Tracy Hyde, one of the big names, and sadly no longer active as a band. Then I want to mention Luby Sparks. I found them on this list of 171 albums. I think they were way down the list. The album cover just intrigued me because in the small image on the computer screen, I thought it was 2 girls kissing. I thought, what is this? And I just went and listened to it, and wow, this is really great stuff. So Luby Sparks recorded this album in London, and I can't remember who the producer was, but it was somebody from either Ride or Slowdive. I think it was one of those big name people anyway who produced it. They have a video for their first single called Thursday, which is track 3 on here. And that video shows them, you know, going around in some park by some old building and in the, you know, trees and stuff in London. And it is just such a wonderfully catchy song. Lots of guitar distortion, but really with a pop flavor. Very much like a very catchy dream pop type melody with the fuzzy guitars. So great song. Sadly, the singer, I've forgotten her name now. I think her name was Emiko. If it's not Emiko, I'll write what it is on the screen down here. She left the band shortly after the release of this album, and then they got in a new singer, Erika. Now, Erika is cool. Her looks are cool. She looks like a performer. In the band photos, in their videos, she looks like an alternative rock performer. But she does have a different quality to her voice, which gives the band a different sound. Still, it's really cool, but I really like the sound of this album. Actually, I thought this was Paris Hilton on the cover. And no, it's not a girl, it's a guy. It's a young teen guy with long hair and a hair clip kissing a girl. And just, yeah, that kind of gives the feeling of what this album is like, this kind of like a young teen type of thing. But they've got tracks like Hateful Summer, which is my second favorite song on here, Life of Misery, which is one of my favorite songs on here, Farewell Lily, Sparks, the second track on here, is great. So I really like this album, and Thursday is my absolute favorite track off this one. Talked about Tokyo Shoegazer, Shoegazer already, a couple of videos now, so there's not much more to say about them except that this album is really such a fantastic album, really embracing what the shoegaze sound is all about. My one gripe with this is that the production is a bit condensed or a bit dense or a bit thick. So there are some really beautiful sonic moments that are kind of clouded in the density, and I would like to have heard them a little more clearly if possible. Nevertheless, this is just chock full of great tracks. The opening track, 299 Addiction, an charging instrumental, great. Just Alright, wonderful track. A couple of other really great ones on here. Track 3, Bright. That is really a phenomenal track, and this is the one I hear people mentioning too from this album. I think Almi on his channel mentioned it, and maybe also Stained Glass Stories mentioned it, but Bright is just such a wonderful track. It is really a beautiful sounding song. The chorus has a great melody. The vocalist Yuki is fantastic. She does have a high voice, but as I've said before, it's more of a mature woman's voice, almost an angelic quality to it, and very loud guitars. Again, the jet turbine engine sound. And the final part, there's a bit of a gentle part, and then they go back into the chorus. And listening to that last part, the chorus, and then Yuki just singing high notes, and then finally the song carrying on instrumentally to the end, the impression I get is it's like watching the world come to an end in a hail of giant asteroids and thinking that it is just the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. That's my feeling from listening to the last minute or two of this song. Great song. So that is Bright from Tokyo Shoegazer, or Tokyo Shoegazer. I've explained what the name means. It's quite humorous. And apparently they actually formed originally just as a birthday present for someone, and then decided to continue as a band. Okay, so the very last one I want to mention, and this band gets mentioned an awful lot. This is Yuragi, and from their second EP, Still Dreaming, Still Deafening. What a great title for a shoegaze band, because the vocals are very light and high and almost whispered at times. Some of the music is really slow and atmospheric, so it has that dreamy quality, but they get loud too, as a shoegaze band should, like just full-on guitar volume. The drummer often stands out for me on here. This album is wonderfully produced. You can hear everything the percussion kit is doing, the drum kit. You can hear the bass, you can hear the guitar layers, the vocals. It's beautifully produced. And it is the track Bedside album version that is probably my #1 shoegaze song for now. And that's, you know, since May, it has remained my #1 top song. I love that track, and that is also the track that Almy mentioned on his video as the pull-out track from this. But this whole album, anyway, EP, it's 6 songs, is just fantastic. This, I would say, is one of the Japanese shoegaze songs shoegaze albums you've gotta hear. Now, originally their debut album, a debut EP, 4-track one called Nightlife. This was out of print for a while. It was recently reissued. I think I found it on that Holiday Records site, I think it was, or it was Yuragi at base. Anyway, it was available and I got it. It is also quite good. Not as good as the next one though. And then Almy on his channel said that their later full-length albums are just not as interesting. In fact, they're getting rather boring. However, the other day I was visiting Disc Union, or a couple of weeks ago, and I found 2 Yuragi albums available. And then just as I was leaving the store, in fact, they were just closing at that time, I happened to notice the same 2 albums available on CD. Of course, I already had one of them, so I went back a few days later, got the other one. This is curiously titled, For You, Adroit It But Soft. I think they don't need the it. For You, Adroit But Soft would have worked wonderfully. But anyway, this actually is still a pretty good album. I'd say half the songs I really like. They again have Yuragi's ability to use loud distorted guitars, great drumming, and wonderful vocals. The final track on here, I Wish You By My Side, is my favorite one. Some of the other tracks though, there are a couple on here where it's like only one member was in the studio and using electronic stuff and programmed drum beats, and then maybe some pre-recorded vocal tracks that were then mixed using auto-tune, like specifically to create that, you know, artificial effect. But sounds like somebody in the band was trying to experiment with something different, and I'm not particularly keen on those. Nice that they're trying to expand their sound palette, but it's not my area of interest. Nevertheless, I'm happy I got this album. As I said, at least half the songs on here I really like, worth having. I don't know if I'll be traveling further down the Yuragi road, but certainly, again, I can't recommend this album enough. So that is the end of it. I talked an awful lot, but there was so much to say. Am I done with Japanese shoegaze now? I don't think so. As I said, I've got Kinoko Teikoku albums on order. I've got some other albums. Probably what I will do near the end of the year, I will do another video talking about my top 10 favorite Japanese shoegaze albums that I picked up during the year. So watch out for that if you're interested. I will do a Kinoko Teikoku video later on as well, once I've completed the catalog and digested everything. And yeah, maybe from time to time I will also drop in when I've picked up some interesting albums. So stay tuned. Otherwise, Music is a Journey does actually keep moving around to different stations. I would like to move on to revisit some albums I've had in my collection which are not shoegaze, and some of the bands that I would like to talk about a little bit more, so I give myself a reason to not continuously buy new stuff, but actually listen to what I have. So anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you if you watched the other 2 videos as well. And do leave any comments, any recommendations, any corrections. I accept those as well. And hopefully we'll see you around in some other videos sometime. Thanks everyone. Take care and happy music loving. Bye.